the center of gravity of the world's economy will shift to Asia, especially to East Asia. This shift is unstoppable. Today, the US Congress cannot pass a single free trade bill. China joined the WTO only in 2001, 5 decades after the United States did. And in 2001, as I mentioned earlier, the US economy was 8 times larger than that of China. But by 2013, China's trade with the world had become larger than that of the US. And more critically, more than 120 countries now trade more with China than they do with the US.
Professor Kishore Mahbubani, one of the sharpest minds in global geopolitics, has long predicted the unstoppable rise of Asia. In this video, he reveals exactly why Asia isn't just rising. It's set to define the future of the world. Get ready for insights that challenge the status quo and might just change how you see the global balance of power.
How can the Asians, in one way or another, provide leadership to the world as they become stronger and more economically more powerful and have a greater impact on the world? And I believe that they can provide leadership, again, in 3 areas. The first area that Asia will provide leadership to the world will be in the area of trade and economic integration. Now, as I emphasized earlier, all the theories and the benefits of trade and economic integration were developed and sold by the West to the rest of the world. The ideas came from Western scholars like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. And what's surprising is that even though the ideas originated in the West, the ideas have remained in the West, but the practices have moved to the East. And here I want to emphasize that in the past, it used to be the United States that used to be the chief advocate of free trade around the world. President Ronald Reagan, for example, said that our economic system based on individual freedom, private initiative, and free trade has produced more human progress than any other in history. It's in all our interest to preserve it, protect it, and strengthen it. The United States took the lead after World War II in creating an international trading and financial system that limited government's ability to disrupt free trade across the borders. We did this because history had taught us an important lesson. Free trade serves the cause of economic progress and it serves the cause of world peace. Unquote. This is Ronald Reagan. Right? Today, the US Congress cannot pass a single free trade bill, despite such clear statements, right? And it's actually quite shocking that it is the Asian countries that are implementing free trade principles. Now, here's one concrete example so you understand what happens when you don't implement free trade. In the year 2000, US trade with the 10 ASEAN countries in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, was $135 billion, right? And US trade was a result of US opening itself up. And China's trade with ASEAN was only $40 billion. So US trade was more than 3 times China's trade with ASEAN. But by 2021, US trade with ASEAN had grown significantly, almost 3 times, from 135 to $380 billion, almost 3 times. But China's trade with ASEAN, because China had signed a free trade agreement with ASEAN in 2001, went from 40 billion, and last year it hit 975 billion, an increase of 25 times in 20 years. I can tell you, this has never happened before. Never. You look at the trade between the 2 largest economic entities in the world. The United States and the European Union are the 2 largest economic entities in the world. They've had trading relationships for hundreds of years. What is the total trade? 900 billion. Less than China and ASEAN. So this is an example of amazing shifts that are happening, all in the last 20 years. Amazing shifts. This is what makes the Asian century so real. Now, let me add another shocking statistic. The combined economies of the European Union in 2022 was 16.6 trillion, over 4 times larger than ASEAN's combined GDP of 3.6 trillion. EU 16.6, ASEAN 3.6. Now, let me ask you a simple question. Did the EU or the ASEAN contribute more to global economic growth between 2010 and 2020? The EU is so much bigger, 4 times bigger. No, it was ASEAN. It's quite amazing, right? So this is as a result of that, by the way, the ASEAN countries have grown phenomenally. In the year 2000, Japan's GDP, and as you know, Japan is one of the most successful economies in Asia. Japan's GDP was, in the year 2000, 8 times the size of ASEAN. Now it is 1.5 times the size of ASEAN. And by 2030, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan. Again, all this is happening in the last 20, 30 years. Remarkable shifts. And that's why I think that Asians will provide the leadership in trade and economic integration because they have seen the benefits. They know it works. And the world's largest free trade agreement, the RCEP, was launched last year. The second reason why I think the second area in which Asia will lead the world is that the Asian countries are now going to integrate themselves, not just among themselves, but with the rest of the world too. And China joined the WTO only in 2001, 5 decades after the United States did. And in 2001, as I mentioned earlier, the US economy was 8 times larger than that of China. But by 2013, China's trade with the world had become larger than that of the US. Indeed, by 2021, China's trade with the world of 6.1 trillion was 1.3 times larger than US trade of 4.7 trillion. And more critically, more than 120 countries now trade more with China than they do with the US. And this is true, by the way, for countries that are even very far away from China. As you know, Brazil is much, much closer to the United States than it is to China. But in 2022, Brazil's trade with China of $150 billion was larger than US trade with Brazil of $92.6 billion. And again, it's grown very fast. In the year 2000, it took the Brazil 1 year to export $1 billion to China. Now it takes Brazil 72 hours to export $1 billion to China. See the speed of change. And it's not just within Asia, the rest of the world is also getting integrating. And just let me add another statistic to illustrate what are the structural forces that are also driving this. And this is an important point because everybody assumes that the biggest markets are still in the West. But in 2010, the size of the retail goods market in the US was $4 trillion, more than double the size of the Chinese retail goods market, which was $1.8 trillion. 2010. By 2020, US had grown from 4 trillion to 5.5 trillion, 4 to 5.5. China's had grown from 1.8 to 6 trillion, bigger than the US. And I want to add another important point here, that the size of the middle class population in Asia is also exploding. And I'm going to focus on the 3 major economic entities, what I call the new CIA. Now, CIA is not Central Intelligence Agency. CIA is China, India, ASEAN. 1.4 billion in China, 1.4 billion in India, close to 700 million. In ASEAN, that makes it 3.5 billion, I guess over 40% of the world's population, right? Among these 3.5 billion people, in the year 2000, there were only 150 million people in the middle class. Only 150 million, right? By 2020, the number was bigger than 2 billion. And by 2030, you'll reach 3 billion. So when you have this exploding middle class populations, these markets will attract the whole world. Because that's where the growth is going to come from this massive, large, new middle class populations. Now, finally, the final area in which Asia might provide some leadership to the world is through beginning to share its rich cultural output from its ancient histories. And it's fair to say the total output of many of these ancient civilizations, wherever you go, India, China, Southeast Asia, is massive, right? But you only begin to have a cultural renaissance only after you have an economic resurgence. So what you've seen so far in Asia is the economic resurgence. I hope I've given you enough data to convince you it's happening. And that will now be followed by cultural renaissance, and that's just beginning. And the rest of the world is beginning to be aware of it. And as you know, cultural products, for example, from South Korea, have now stormed the world. I must confess, I've never watched BTS. I suspect you all have. I can't do the Gangnam dance, but it's amazing how one country like South Korea has exported so much. But in the even Japan last year, the global demand for Japanese anime grew by 118% over the course of the pandemic. And more than 100 million households watched anime on Netflix from 2019 to 2020. And of course, there's Bollywood from India and so on and so forth. And the global yoga market is expected to reach $66 billion. So you can see that while Asia has focused a lot on its economic development over the last 20, 30 years, you will now see a great cultural resurgence, and that will attract the rest of the world to Asia too. So in short, to summarize my lecture in a few words, the center of gravity of the world's economy will shift to Asia, especially to East Asia. This shift is unstoppable. And this economic resurgence will in turn generate the renaissance of several different Asian civilizations. In short, as I said at the beginning of my lecture, when Asian societies return to the center stage of world history, you will see 1,000 flowers bloom. Thank you.